I'm here for two reasons. One, to get out of class. Some of y'all may relate to that. I've had a very, very busy week. We're getting close to graduation. Our graduation's on May 4th, and we'll graduate 140 new PharmDs, get them ready to go out into the world. And so they're really tying their pieces together, and so there's lots of things to do. But the other piece is I'm here on a fishing trip. My background is I'm an addiction pharmacist, psychopharmacologist. I have multiple components in my world in pharmacy. One area is addiction medicine, the other is psychiatric medicine, and the other one is chronic pain management. And I focus on primarily those individuals who suffer from addiction and mental disorders, and have done that for 25 plus years. And I find that treatment, even though it's effective, it's limited. And so what I decided to do about 3 years ago is to come and really start to spend some energy with the prevention components of what we're doing inside of our state, and to try to see if I can make some effort from a research standpoint and from an academic standpoint about how we can truly prevent an addiction process from occurring before it starts. Because once the brain chemistry, as we will talk about this morning, because the slides you will see, they're fairly up to date. I'm going to talk about adolescent development and other things. It's difficult once the train starts to stop it. And that's what I want to talk about. And for you guys, I know that y'all are, in middle school and some of you in high school, and I don't really apologize for this, so y'all pay attention to this, because we're going to talk about how this brain evolves and what adolescent does to the brain, and how alcohol impairs that development. Very simply, it impairs it significantly, more significantly than we've ever thought. And so if you're planning to be a PhD and you drink alcohol for 2 years, you may not even get a bachelor's. If you drink for 4 years, you may not even get out of high school. So the thing about it is there's some limitations that are pretty severe when it comes to alcohol. I know there's other drugs, and I do include a couple of those in this talk, but it's primarily a focus on alcohol. So I'm here to try to help you, the next generation, because I'm getting to the end of my career. As my wife asked me yesterday, what's the plan? And I said, my plan is to pull the ticket in a couple of years. I'm already Social Security eligible, and that gets very attractive these days. But also, I've been fortunate enough to have a very successful career, and I'm ready to kind of step into some other things. But before I do that, I want to see what we can do with you guys. So I'm going to see. So we're going to talk about alcohol, and this is the Alcohol and Addiction series. It's a series I put together, and it's probably a series of 10 lectures that we have done over time. But this is a brand new lecture, so I'm going to probably stumble through some of this. Y'all may have some questions, as I will do, but I'm going to kind of use y'all as guinea pigs to see if this really works, and if this is very helpful. If we do, we'll see. All right, let me see if I can get everything to work now. Oh, come on now. It was working a while ago. All right, let me go over here. All right, we'll start out with a little. When I was 5, everyone told me to be a big boy. When I was 10, they told me I should be more mature. Now they say it's time to start acting like an adult. At this rate, I'll be eligible for Social Security before I graduate from high school. Y'all have had these instructions, and adolescence and the at best is very tumultuous. It is something that we have some issues with as we go through this. And I guess my batteries are not working. Hang on 1 second. I've got to have this clicker to work. I don't guess. Oh, it would help to plug it in, wouldn't it? Simple thing. There we go. All right, so let's talk about adolescence. There are 3 rides or pathways through adolescence. And this has been studied through the sociologists, through various adolescent psychologists, psychiatrists. There's the kiddie roller coaster, the continuous growth group. There's about 23% of individuals, kids that are coming through adolescence, that kind of have a smooth ride. In other words, they're well adjusted, they meet the demands on this stage, they seem to have an innate sense of what to do. And if you're a parent of one of those kids, you say, oh my God, I'm so lucky. Because they have that sense, and they seem not to have many bumps as they adjust through this. Then we have the second kind of adolescent, or go for the ride or two on the big roller coaster. There's a surgent growth group, about 35%, another about a third, comprised of reasonably well-adjusted youngsters who may have difficulty coping with an unexpected trauma. And this is an issue. We have lots of traumas in this culture. But these kids do not do well, and it can be a divorce, it could be death of a grandparent, loss of a pet. Lots of things happen, and these kids may be bumping along pretty well, and all of a sudden they have this trauma, and then certain things happen. So we have the kind of the go for the ride or two on the big roller coaster, we call it. And then we have the third group, which is the largest group of all, 42%. And this is the what we call go for the biggest, scariest roller coaster you can find. Now, this is the group that's characteristic of adolescent turmoil that has been hypothesized by these researchers of storm and stress theorists. This is a group that doesn't adjust well to their environment. They tend to be isolated. They tend to be unique. They tend to be attracted to high-risk situations. And we do not exactly understand how that's about, but what I'm telling you is it all has to do with brain chemistry. Biologically, the brain does not mature until around the age of 24 to 26. So you add these three different groups in here, and you got one that's smooth along, and it's the mini roller coaster, and then you got one that may take a ride on the roller coaster because of a trauma, and then you've got a group that will always take the ride on the roller coaster because of various things. So y'all kind of look at where you are, and this is how this whole thing begins. So which one is it? Is it the kiddie roller coaster? It's the one that's no bumps. This is kind of what the kiddie roller coaster looks like. Or is it the big one? It's where the second group may go for a ride or two on the big roller coaster, and it may be because of those traumas they may have occurred. And then we've got the biggest one and the scariest one. It's where they will always go on the biggest and scariest and always take those risks. And that is where we kind of put everybody in the group biologically, chemically, before they enter into the world. See, the world I want to look into is the middle school, high school population, because that is where we will see in a minute the high risk factors may be a part. So the reason I'm concerned about this is because one of the issues is the prefrontal cortex. It's the boss of the brain. It's the frontal lobe right here. And it's for good judgment, complex thinking, decision making, planning, impulse control. And a majority of the brain wiring takes place by the age of 16, so by the time the 16, or what I call the mid-adolescent period, it's wired, but it's not wired for sound. Do you understand? It's wired, but it's not wired for sound. So what we have, y'all, and this wiring continues, is like building a house. You build the house and you put the wires in it, but you don't have them connected to the outlets. Or you have the panel yet to be finished. You understand? So for the next 8 years, from age 16 to age 24 to 25 to 26, that's when the house is being completed. So again, a very high-risk group, a very high-risk situation, and then you add the three different types, the mini roller coaster, the ride or two, or the one who always takes the ride every time. You understand? So here we go. And so let's talk about this chief executive, this brain. This is the one that makes the call. It's the one that it's the decision maker. The prefrontal lobe comprises about 30% of the area, the physical area of the brain. It's a big deal. It is very, very important. It is the thing that will guide you throughout your whole life. So when we compare that to other mammals, if we look at dogs, and we always think the dogs are so smart, and they know this, and depending on how, and I love dogs, and I've got my daughter's got a little Dachshund called Elvis, and me and Elvis, we just had the best time because he's a daddy lap dog. You know, I done taught him how to. He don't go nowhere; he just lays on my lap. That's the way I like it. You know. But the thing about it is, and I sometimes say, Elvis, ain't you got any sense? Because Elvis, he don't know what a cat is. He's always been inside all his life. So he sees a cat. I'm in the country, and we got these big country tomcats, you know, and he'll see one. And the other day, I was kind of mean to him. He'd get up in the window, and he'd bark, so I opened the door, and he shut out the door after the cat. And the cats laugh at him. They play with him. You know, they'll jump on the fence and show themselves, and he'll be, wee, 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 because his frontal cortex is only about 7% of his brain. Now, this is what I love with education. Some of y'all are dog people, right? How many of y'all are cat people? And y'all are always so bragging, oh, my cat's so much smarter than your dog. They're so much smarter. No, hell, no, they're not. Look at him. 3%. Now you can see it's because it's comprised. It's comprised. And it may be how they assimilate the information. I mean, I've had this discussion with cat lovers after such talk. But regardless of saying is, the frontal lobe is very important, and it comprises of a large amount in humans. Now, the reason that it comprises, and I didn't put the slide up here with the ages, you have to understand at 16, most of y'all know how to plan, and at 16, most adolescents know how to attention, and some have some reasonable judgment, but it's not always the best, and I'm going to talk about why that is in a minute, and the reflection. But what happened is, by the time you get to 24 to 26 down here, you want to make sure that you understand adults have goal-directed behavior. This is what I want to do with my life. This is what I'm going to be. This is who I'm going to marry. This is, etc. And also, they can foresee consequences. The adolescent brain does not do that very well. It does not foresee consequences. Now, go back to the mini roller coaster. That brain may be probably as well adjusted. It may have an idea of what to do in certain consequences. So if there's somebody drinking and they're at a party and they invite them to take a ride, that brain would say, I'm not going. Whereas the roller coaster, a high roller coaster 1 or 2 times may or may not, maybe it'd be a 50-50 chance. But the one who always takes the high risk, guess what? They're going to always go with that person because of the call is not being made. And it has to do with the development of the brain, you see? So you have to, see, in prevention work, you have to have a plan, y'all. Y'all have to have a plan. It's like a fire plan. It's like safety in the house. You know, they're talking about, you know, the smoke detectors, they're ionization types. They don't even go off when it's smoky in the house. So you got to have the photoelectric type that's in the house that also can see the particles, and it will go off and you can wake up. But once that smoke detector goes off, guess what? 70% of people don't have a plan. So guess what happens? They die of smoke inhalation because they can't follow the plan. They don't know to get low. They don't know to go out this window first or this door. You understand? Same way in this adolescent world when it comes to prevention of dangerous situations. You need to know a plan. And that's where parenting comes involved, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. Because, y'all, in the brain there's a low road, and the low road is called the amygdala. It's a part of that instinctual brain. It's a part of a brain that's a part of that reward pathway and other emotional centers. It's called the reptilian brain. It's an automatic response. It's fast moving, low road of the brain. It's the go brain. It's the instinctual brain. And it's the priority brain. Your instinctual brain is the priority brain. It's already sitting in case there was some kind of emergency that happened here right now. It would tell you exactly what to do instinctually. You would either run and flee, or you would fight and try to take care if there was a fire. You would try to rescue your people. You know, some of you would. And then there'd be some of you that would freeze. You wouldn't know what to do. That's what that go brain's about. So it's part of the low road. And then the high road is the cortex. It's that brain we talked about. It's the thinking brain. Slow moving, high road. So there's a fire. Oh, there's smoke. Oh, let me see what I want to do. Oh, do I want to go out this door or that door or that door? You understand? It's very much a cognitive component to the world. The younger the brain, the more instinctual the brain. Now remember that. The younger the brain, the more instinctual the brain. So they're always going to have a go button until that prefrontal cortex evolves, until the prefrontal cortex evolves to where you can really think things out. It's very important to remember that. And then the prefrontal cortex is also the thinking brain, and it's the bottom part of the frontal cortex. It's this part right here. It's the last part of the brain to develop. And it is the stop button. Just say no. You can't say no unless you've got a button to push. And most of you young brains don't have your button yet. The only button you have is your parents. The only button you have is your peers. The only button you may have is people around you that may do the same thing. You may say no as a group, but it's individually, it's unless, again, we'll go back to the types. The mini roller coaster may say no, more likely would say no in a situation like this because there's an intuitiveness to that brain. Whereas the one that may say, I'll take a ride or two, guess what? They may say no here, but they may say yes here. Whereas the last brain that always says yes, guess what? They will always say yes and no. And that's about 45% of the brains that we see in adolescents. All right. So here's the executive function. So here we go. So we're going to try to get y'all from childhood, y'all, you know, Santa Claus and all that kind of stuff. Y'all remember when y'all gave up Santa Claus? And now we got Easter bunnies coming. And y'all going to get baskets. How many of y'all going to get baskets? Look at him. Oh, man. God almighty. Easter. I ain't going to get a basket. Why not? Nobody loves me or something. Anyway. Onset of puberty begins with remodeling. What remodeling is we've got to restructure. We've got to take those wires that we had in that framed house, and now we got to start splitting them, and we're going to start making the electrical connections. And so that depends on one chemical, y'all. Y'all need to hear me when I say this. There's one chemical that creates remodeling in the adolescent brain, and it's called dopamine. Dopamine. Extremely important. Recently discovered. Now, dopamine migrates to the frontal part of the brain. So it comes from the back part of the brain where it's developed in the midbrain region and comes up in here, and it goes into this, and it involves the ability to recognize when something is important and to take action. That's a big deal. Because when you're a 2-year-old, you don't know to get in and out of the road. When you're a 12-year-old, you have learned that, right? And that's because the dopamine has increased into your prefrontal brain, and it says you don't know to go there because it's dangerous. The executive function, the growth spurts, and the pruning of the synapses leads to relative inefficiencies. All right, so I'm going to show you a slide in a minute, and what this is some of you that may be in your 11, 12, 13 years old, you've got about 16 million synapses up here in this prefrontal cortex. By the time you're 16, you're going to have 4 million. And the brain is going to shut down that additional 8 million synapses and turn them off because it makes it more efficient. It's kind of like you go out here and your parents, when you were in elementary school and you were in baseball and then you were basketball and then you also, did soccer and you did all these and dance and whatever else. And you did all these things because you're trying to find out what you like. Well, when you get to middle school, then it kind of tunes it down to where maybe baseball is what you want to be. So you play baseball and you play a little basketball. But by the time you get to high school, guess what? It's just baseball. You understand? Because you start focusing, because your skill level's got to increase in order for you to get better, in order for you to mature into a very good athlete or an academic, either one, same thing. So but during this time it gets real inefficient. What does that mean? Well, the speed can identify emotions drops as much as 20%, so then you get all emotional. And your parents say no, and you want to go with your buddy, and y'all want to go camping, or y'all want to do something, and they tell you no, and you're 12 or 13, 14 years old. Because your circuitry is imbalanced, your emotions are usually out here on your sleeve. So here comes, this is where all of these wrinkles came from on my forehead. Is when I have a daughter and a son, when they came through adolescence, they were just lovely children at 9, 10 years old. They loved me, and I'd give them an Easter basket, and they'd love me. Well, at 12, 14 years old, I gave them an Easter basket. Well, it ain't the right color. Or didn't have the right kind of candy in it, or blah, 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 blah. So what happens is, this emotional state is and hear me when I say this, when these emotions are so imbalanced from the ages of 12 to about 18, you're vulnerable, y'all. And that's when this alcohol becomes the world's greatest tranquilizer. It becomes the calmative of the brain. Most people don't know this, but that's why a lot of kids like alcohol, is because of the turmoil that they're dealing with, the noise inside of their head, the voice that's telling them that I'm insecure, I'm inadequate, I'm ugly, I'm a nobody. Whatever those voices may be, alcohol makes that disappear, even in small amounts. But the good news is, if you can avoid that risk factor, it returns to normal about age 18. Younger teens use more the crocodile or the reptilian, the instinctual brain, so they don't have cognitive capabilities so much. So what they fall back on is that instinctual go brain. If they're of the type of the mini roller coaster, they'll probably make a good choice. But the other two types may not make such a good choice. And so guess what? We'll have 67% of our group here who may make a bad call when it comes to drinking alcohol or maybe using other drugs because of the influences outside of their environment. So one of the things prevention has to do is to structure a plan, and that plan has to be developed like you guys are here now and you're learning all this. See, not everybody's going to know this. Not everybody knows this about the brain. I see, if I was to ask y'all how much you've learned so far in my first 10 slides, and if you knew this already, I would be really excited. But what I find out, not many people know what I've just said to you because they just don't know and understand the brain is extremely complicated. So here we got the younger teens using this go brain, and so guess what? Danny says, well, my parents are out of town and you're 16 years old and we're going to have a party at the farm. Oh, there'll be a lot of time. We're going to have a band and everything, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to want to, well, if you don't have something up here and you just depend on the instinctual brain, even the intervention is your parents. See, the ones who have parents that set those boundaries and say, no, those kids are most likely going to hit that brick wall, and that keeps them out of the mess. But a lot of these kids don't have those parents so available, and guess what? There's nothing to stop them, so they go directly into this mess. And I want y'all to understand the biological component, that is to be expected. See, the adolescent brain seeks what the parents do not provide. Do y'all know that? That's what the adolescent brain will do. It will seek what the parents do not provide, mainly because of how it functions. Now, the executive function often misreads facial expressions because of this immature wiring I've talked about. And so, for instance, if I was to, what's that face? What's that a face of? Huh? What's that face of? Y'all tell me what emotion this woman's experiencing. Shock? Freaked out? Fear? All right. Well, the thing about it is she's actually angry. She's so angry she's in this, but you read it as fear because the brain doesn't translate all of the emotion and all the components to the face. I could give y'all 10 faces. I should have done that. Brought you a test and gave you 10 faces and have you test y'all to see which emotion they had had. And y'all would be sitting there thinking. But see, what I'm saying is if I show it to you just for 2 seconds, you've got an emotional piece. So what happens, y'all, is the adolescent brain misreads the environment. It does not have the capability to read the environment appropriately. And that's to be expected too. So that again, the issue is, and so what we have is all this advertising of alcoholic beverages and all of this fun, and they'll see all this fun and all these people and they look so good and all this, but then I talk to the sheriff and I take you down to the drunk tank and I'll show you some people, I'll take you to detox and I'll show you some other people. The end result of sometimes what that drinking can end up causing, people don't know that, and the adolescent doesn't know that. The amygdala. Lots of connection between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Now, 16 to 24 is where this brain is working very hard to connect the go brain to the thinking brain. The go brain to the thinking brain. It's very, very important to keep that in mind because as you do this, do something part of the brain. See, you want to connect that amygdala and that prefrontal cortex together because that's how it all works. Because then you've got a full deck instead of half a deck, so to speak. Then here, let's talk about sleep. Everybody gets on the kids, why do they have to sleep so much? They're sleeping all day, blah, 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 blah. Well, in the circadian rhythms, night owls to guard the cave, keep the fire going, And kids, I'm telling you, if you want to make them nuts, keep them up all night. I'm telling you, if you want to make adolescents nuts, keep them up all night. Because what happens, y'all, is too little sleep impairs a teenager's thinking ability and causes a variety of problems. Teenagers are the most sleep-deprived segment of the population. Now, why do you need so much sleep for, huh? Y'all want to hear this? Yes, sir.
So our brain can develop?
Yep. You got to have 9 hours. See? So if I was to take an average, and I'd love to do this study, when's the average kid go to bed? When did y'all go to bed last night? 9:30? What time do y'all get up?
About 10.
10? What time do y'all get up? 7? 6:30? 6:45? Did y'all want to get up? How many of y'all wanted to get up this morning? Raise your hand. How many of y'all wanted to get up this morning? I didn't want to get up this morning. And I ain't sure. All right. Your brain is telling you, and why is it telling you need more sleep? It's pretty interesting what this is. Dendrites grow during sleep. If you get enough sleep, all the neurons fire and rehearse learning. What this sleep does, y'all, is as you're rewiring this brain for the first time, and as these little pathways grow, not only do they grow, but the neurons have to fire to make sure it's working. And then it's the only time it can do that because there's not enough neurons to go around while you're up and active. It has to be in the sleep cycle, so that's how it builds it. So that's why people have to sleep so long, especially in the adolescent brain, in order for this to happen. Also can't learn if tried to learn too much the day before. Y'all know when your head hurts, and your head's going to hurt after this lecture. Because you're going to see a lot of different things, and if I was good exposure, and that's why we're recording this thing for y'all, so that you forget something, we can go back and y'all can relearn it again. You hear what I'm saying? I'm exposing you to brand new information that's going to create new neurons and new firings, and this really won't make a whole lot of sense to you after you've gone to sleep tonight and slept well, and then get up in the morning and things start to make some sense to you. You hear me? So this adolescent brain is pretty remarkable. All right, in the formal operation, decision-making, problem-solving, predicting the probable outcomes of behavior, well, like I said, without parenting, the young adolescent brain is most likely on the go side, so guess what? Depends on the influences of the environment. So if they're in a healthy environment where people are not drinking and they're using appropriate boundaries and they understand what that's about, they're most likely not to run into a problem. But if they're in a different environment where there's drinking, very permissive drinking, very use of drinking, exposure to this and all of the other things, not with understanding, then the decision-making process would be the opposite. Weighing the opinions and selective alternatives, this is again a plus 20 decision-making process. Now, formal operations begin in females 14 to 16. And we're going to talk about gender differences in just a second. In males 16 to 18, women mature faster than men because they have dual hormonal cycles. Men have one primary hormonal cycle, and it's all connected in how this development goes because of what I'm fixing to tell you. Your full formal operation is again 24 to 26. All right, what's these operations? Look, abstractions, ideals. This is the teenage hypocrisy. To an adolescent, expressing an ideal is equal to living up to it. Oh, man. When you're young, the world is a grand place, and I can do anything. It's a great place to be. But you'll fall off that rock about age 25, 30. When you don't get the job you wanted, or the girl or boy that you wanted to marry didn't marry you, or you didn't get into the school that you wanted to go, and all of a sudden, you understand what I'm saying? But the idealism is a breed. That's why I love being around y'all, because it helps inspire mine to come back somewhere. Because I'm tainted. I'm very tainted. I'm very, not so much the world is a great place. But when I see you guys, it makes my world better. You understand? That's why I like doing what I do. And then you get hypercritical parents. Now, how many of y'all on your parents' case? Huh? Now, why are you on your parents' case? Well, this may be part of it. Able to imagine the perfect parent. What would be the perfect parent? See, let me do whatever I wanted to do. Give me whatever you want me to have. Let me go wherever I wanted to go. Whatever. See, if I was, it'd be a great research study. But these guys have done it. Or the perfect parent. Now realizing that yours is not perfect makes for a critical, argumentative adolescent. So now you found out your parents are not perfect. And or there's issues with them, and then all of a sudden in your world you go down to the go brain, and then you start reacting to that. And that's normal. It's normal. This is not an abnormal thing. But this is what the development. And also at a certain point, many teenagers start out with a rash of lying. Why do you lie? Well, maybe a way of solving problems that could again point back to the development of the frontal lobe. You don't know how to answer the question. You don't know. See, one of the greatest things I can tell a young adolescent brain is, I don't know. Can y'all say that together? I don't know. Can y'all say it one more time? I don't know. Now, go home this afternoon. Parent walks in and asks you to take out the trash. And you will say, I don't know. Very strange, though, isn't it? A lot of people don't know that. I mean, it's interesting how language, but that's because the brain is not fully developed. Now, this is what I love. I call adolescence hormones on feet, with feet. Terrible twos and big bodies. Lack of impulse control. They're the goal brain. There's no stopping them. The enthusiasm, the excitement, that's why we want to control that enthusiasm and excitement and structure them. That's what the educational world is all about, is to control that as excitement and focus on them. So what we see is puberty is developing 2 years earlier in girls and somewhat earlier in boys, greater than 100 years ago. And a part of that has to do, we believe, with our dietary situation. Speculation of puberty and menses is starting earlier in girls to do the hormones in the foods. And so we've got all this discussion now. Increased in thrill-seeking behavior, an engine without a driver. And that's what we see primarily in the males, and we've been focused on males because, again, of hormonal changes. Now, let's talk about parental circumstances and hormones. High testosterone sons, and again, the biological component as we've looked at this closer and closer. These high testosterone sons, and this means early onset puberty as a result. Usually these guys start puberty at 11 or 12 instead of 13, 14, or 15. More likely to engage in risky behaviors, skipping school, they're involved with sexual activities, lying, drinking, and stealing. But this is the other piece. This is where this came from. The low testosterone sons are more likely to be depressed. What most people don't understand about adolescent depression is a hormonal imbalance predominantly. That's one of the reasons that a lot of the antidepressants do not work very effectively, because it is not a result of a neurotransmitter deficiency such as serotonin or dopamine or whatever. It has to do with hormonal imbalances. So one of the things that the new adolescent psychiatrists are doing hormonal levels having to do with that and evaluating that, because guess what? Even in adults, y'all, we have found both in men and women, and we've known this in women somewhat for a while, but we didn't know it about in men. In adult male depression, major depression, one of the things we find is that 70% of those men who are suffering from major depression also have low testosterone levels. So the thing about it is, if we adjust those levels, then guess what we find out? We also adjust the depression without uses of psychotropic medication. So we've also discovered this. Low testosterone daughters who had poor relationships with their mothers are more likely to do risky things. And of course, women do have testosterone as well as men have estrogen. Low testosterone daughters who have had bad relationships with their fathers are more likely to be depressed. And then this is Dr. Starch, who's done a lot of work in this. With good relationships, though, however, high and low levels really do not matter. So what this says is a biological validation of good parenting. If parents are present and if they are available, then most likely the individuals will have good decision-making skills. And again, we go back to that same premise of what this is all about. Now, I love this slide. Now, guys, listen up, because y'all may be in this. 80% of men and 80% of women and 20% of men have similar brain architecture. Yay! 1 out of 5 males are smart as women. I'll put that in a very positive light, because that makes 4 out of 5 dumber than the average woman. You understand? But the thing about it is, they're better designed for information processing, language, and relationship skills. All right. 80% of men and 20% of women have similar brain structure. They're built for action, motor skills, problem solving. So we have this. So here's a slide. Early on differences. here's the guys. Grunt, grunt. And y'all know this. Guys, y'all know this. We'll say, how you doing? Good to see you. And we'll walk on out the room. But women, grunt, 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 grunt. I mean, they gotta take the laundry list out and the grocery list and how they're blah, 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 because that's how they're wired. But the thing about it is there are differences in the sexes, and there are differences in the biology of the sexes, and there are differences in the pick. Let me talk about alcohol and the impact of the sexes right now. Alcohol almost eliminates estrogen in a very short period of time in women. The younger the female, the more impact on the estrogen. You eliminate the estrogen, you also diminish the progesterone. You stop the menses cycle, you start or slow and then almost stop puberty in its tracks. And it can take less than 4 drinks in a period of less than 3 months. If they're drinking 4 drinks on every 4 or 5 days over a 3-month period, they can eliminate almost 70% of their estrogen. Whereas males, testosterone is somewhat resistant. In fact, it is stimulated by the use of alcohol. And most of us that have been around these individuals, and we have some folks here in law enforcement, when males drink, guess what? It increases the testosterone and they become overly aggressive, get themselves in all kinds of circumstances and situations. So you got 2 parts of this equation. So you have that. Now, boys are from, well, I won't say Pluto, Uranus. Boys are wired to act on their emotions rather than work through them with language. They're doers. That's what testosterone does. It makes them doers. And I used to make a big deal about the differences in men and women about males are hunters. You know, they'll go out and they hunt, and they'll wander and they'll gather. They'll hunt, they'll wander, and they gather. All right, because that's what testosterone does. They're hunters, you know. They're just always doing something. And as women are nurturers. So how does a hunter hook up with a nurturer? Y'all want to know that? That'll be my next lecture. But boys have more CSF, spinal fluid, cerebral spinal fluid. The main purpose of CSF appears to be to cushion the brain in case of trauma to the cranium. So the body already knows that these males are going to get themselves in physical altercations, and so they try to protect them from that. You understand? That's how they survive. But you understand we don't survive a lot. That's why there's many, percentage-wise, women are greater than men, and even in our population. Hemispheres. Love hemispheres. Left and right. Y'all know about the old left and right? Whether or not you're the artist or you're the scientist and you got the math or you got English and you put these things together. Well, men's left hemisphere looks different from the right, functions more independently. So we actually can do multitasking doing. Y'all get this? Multitasking doing. So they can be hunting and doing taxes at the same time. You hear me? That's what men do. Whereas women, they get all emotional about it. They don't want to shoot the little deer, and then they're scared that the IRS is going to create an audit. So guess what? There's more touchy-feely to that. Women's 2 hemispheres are essentially indistinguishably by either MRI or an autopsy, so they're balanced. So women are more balanced from the hemispheres than the men. So it's kind of am I predominantly left or right? Well, yes, you can be a predominant left or a predominantly right brain just for y'all to do it, but women are more likely to be balanced regardless. So that's why they're more centered. And the thing that connects them now is what they call the corpus callosum, and this is the CC, both hemispheres from abstract thinking and communication. Left, right, left, right. Now, the dopamine side of the brain is usually on the right side. That means you're going to have a good day. Some of you have these people in your world that are all excited and they're very grateful for what they got, right? They're all excited and they're very grateful. They're happy people. Yay, yay, yay. I have 2 people in my world like that. 2. None of them are in-laws. None of them. No in-laws. I don't have any in-laws. But I have 2 people that are yay, yay. They're cheerleader kind. And then we have this predominantly serotonin side of the brain, and they're always the kind of the irritable, unhappy, not good enough, what's something going on. Every in-law I got's that way. So what do? I stay with my 2 happy people versus going to see my in-laws. Because when I go see my in-laws, it's always, because This CC, something's wrong with it. Well, let me tell you about the CC. It develops from birth, fully develops about the age of 30. It's the last piece of the brain to fully develop. And it balances left and right brain. The information from left and right is back and forth, back and forth. The impact of alcohol on this is what it does over time. It will shut this system down. So what happens is the predominantly dopamine side of the brain gets shut down. So the unhappiness and the irritability, even if they may be a very happy person, guess what? They become more negative. They become more argumentative. They become more prone to violence as a result of the operational components of this. So the CC is a big piece. In women, it's back and forth very quick because of your hormonal levels. Estrogen helps increase the efficiency of this system. Men don't have a lot of estrogen, so guess what? Men, I hate to even show this part, it upsets some people. You have a dirt road. So our left and right, we're not very flexible. I won't go into that. I really won't discuss that. I had a discussion yesterday about that. Anyway, but this is what it looks like, y'all. This is all the millions of fibers that connects this left and right brain. It's a big area that looks in here. And so developmentally, it has to do that, again, that age of 16 to 24. It's crucial. Very, very crucial. Now, this is the other part that concerns me about adolescence. It's called the OOP center, what we call the anterior cingulate gyrus. The cingulate is responsible for helping focus attention. That's why I've got the group right now. The younger the brain is, they're already distracted up here. They're all over the place. It's hard for them to focus. I understand that. I don't take it personal. But the thing about it is, they have to make a concentrated effort to stay focused, because if they don't, they're not going to learn a whole lot because of the limitation of the brain. No, it's just where you are. Links of the cingulate and emotional hippocampus integrate reason and emotion to guide decisions. So when they have this center here, it's helping integrate that amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. You hear me? That's what education's all about, especially in middle schools. You're connecting the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. So you have all these mechanisms, and you've trained all this stuff. And we got the school of education right down the street from us, and they got all this. And then I was down there the other day, and they was telling me about all these new types of curriculum they got and all this stuff. It's pretty remarkable how you do it. And then you got all the technology to help do this. It also, with this, as you connect this lower brain to this brain here, it also helps the ability to emphasize. In other words, to have empathy, to really care about something. And that's a real big deal. Women are more likely to have empathy than men because of the testosterone. And then to undergo high myelinization during adolescence. This thing, between the ages of 13 to 20, it quadruples in the myelinization. Y'all know what myelinization is? That's where we're starting to wrap a fatty tissue around these little pathways. It's like a copper wire without insulation. And myelinization is putting insulation on this copper wire so that thing can fire it 100,000 times. And the speeds increase quadruple over those 7 years. Fastest developmental growth that we ever seen in the brain in the lifetime. Alcohol will stop almost immediately that process. So what happens, y'all? And then people want to say, they all the time are talking about these people who are antisocial types. They have no feeling, they have no experience, and yet they're heavily alcohol dependent. Why is that? It's because they may have started drinking at 13 and this process never evolved. So there's no empathy, there's no connectiveness, there's no process to that as a result. Now, the OOP center anticipates risk, detects, and keeps us from making errors. And so if we make a mistake, and we've got our brain all together, it says, oops, I made a mistake. I need to learn from this. You understand what I'm saying? But if you don't have the OOP center, and alcohol will impair the development of the OOP center, guess what? And I can talk to law enforcement all the time about this. They never learn from their mistakes. They never learn from their mistakes, because the OOP center has been eliminated as a result of their alcohol or drug use. So Let's talk about stress. I love stress. I've had a high stress week. I haven't been able to play golf because it's not warm enough, but today may be the day. So when I'm going to have a little lunch with y'all, and I'm going to disappear. About 2 o'clock, maybe the sun will be on my face and my little driver will be in my hand, and I'll be ready to rock. But women under stress, they release a hormone called oxytocin. Cuts off the connection to the amygdala. So guess what? Women have a chemical in their brain that turns off the go brain. And they can just chill. Now I think what turns that switch, if you want to know what turns the switch, is money. I think money has a lot to do with turning off the switch. Security, safety, everything in their world being right. But they have a biological component. Now, they need oxytocin to reduce the stress because of the risk of pregnancy. Because if this woman becomes pregnant and gets under stress, the likelihood of that completion of that pregnancy becomes very risky. So oxytocin protects the unborn. That's part of what this is about. So one reason to have a child, again, doesn't let burn into the HC. So oxytocin, female are more susceptible to caring, nurturing, and connection. We've talked about that. Men under stress produce testosterone, means I'm going to have to do something. Boys are nearly twice as likely to report having a physical fight and nearly 5 times as likely of carrying a weapon as a result of being under stress. And you can kind of go back to where we are in our culture and our situation and why are people carrying all these guns and what they're all about. If you break it all down, a lot of it has to do with the levels of stress that brain is experiencing, and they're going to find something to offset it. Testosterone is a part that drives part of that training in males. 2 recommendations for boys. Now, I'll give this to the parents. Give an adolescent male some time to get ready to discuss how he is feeling. For example, if a parent needs to talk to a boy about his poor report card, it's better to say to him, "I'd like to talk to you about your report card when you're ready," rather than confront him without warning, because if you're going to confront him without warning, you're going to stimulate the testosterone and you're not going to accomplish a whole lot. And then the other piece of that is boys also may have an easier time unlocking their emotions if they're allowed to move around. Talking, taking a walk, or shooting baskets while discussing tough issues is likely to be more rewarding than sitting down with him on a couch. So that's one way to look at it because of the differences in the hormone. Young women, you can usually sit down on the couch, you can discuss with them. They're more likely to do that. Middle school girls who ate with their families at least 5 times a week were much less likely to use alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana in 5 years. Boys, no association between family meals and substance use and behavior because hormonally they're different. Girls could be picked up on subtle reinforcing messages from the family members, signals that boys tend to miss. Remember now, if you got an empathy hormone, which young women have, you're likely to pick up what the family's doing. Whereas if you only have a go hormone and it's only doing one thing, then guess what? You're going to miss all the pieces of what's going on usually in the families. Males do that. So let's talk about risk-taking and self-esteem. Risk-taking correlates with high self-esteem. Boys' brain produce testosterone, primed to take risks with little thought. Girls' brains produce oxytocin, and guess what? Helps girls take a risk by putting it into a relationship of caring context. In other words, there's a context that usually the females will put together versus the males. So who's more vulnerable to develop a substance abuse issue? More likely the males, because there's no context. Now, that all changes. Now, I'm fixing to go into chemistry, and that all changes. I've just told you about normal development. So it's all fixing to change. And one of the things that changes it is what we call trauma. Now, the effects of extreme depravity in an infant. This child suffered emotional and cognitive problems. This is a normal brain here. You see this? Normal development, nurturing, caring, And this is these are 2-year-olds, by the way. These are 2-year-olds. And so that's how and this is the brain that was deprived. And so this was not normal parenting. This was a child that was abandoned, and was giving through an issue of abuse and other things. And even before any time anything educationally has touched them, guess what? They are deficit in several of the primary chemicals. And we know this. Y'all know this behaviorally. Y'all know that's what we see. But there's a biological component to this. So what do? When it comes to alcohol, this is pretty remarkable. This is a 15-year-old male non-drinker, and this is dopamine, y'all. This is the development of dopamine. And if I was to expand this slide and move it into a 24 to 26-year-old, this whole area would be red, because that's what the development of the brain is about. This is a 15-year-old male heavy drinker. What's missing? Dopamine. And what did I tell you dopamine does in the prefrontal cortex? It helps build the circuitry for appropriate problem solving, for appropriate contact with the world, how to problem solve in an individual way and in a group way. Guess what this brain's going to do? It's not going to have that capability. The reason I don't want people drinking before the age of 21 legally, and preferably not to the age of 24, is because this brain is still very vulnerable. Now, I'm a scientist. What do I know? You know, what do I know? The culture out here, and we tax our alcohol, and we sell alcohol, and we do all those things, and people have choices, and that's up to them. But I'm saying we have a vulnerable population, y'all, that is exposed to this kind of chemical for prolonged, prolonged, and it doesn't have to take years. It can take months, and it can change this brain that rapidly. Now, I'll bring you a new piece to this, and I won't go into all of this because it can get rather complicated, but when we talk about abuse and addiction, I need to tell you that the brain also has two sides to it. It has a reward brain, I feel good brain, real good. And I do. I feel good because I can tell it's going to be sunny and golf clubs are in the car. I'm ready to rock. I know that I'm going to have that 240-yard drive right off the first tee. I can visualize that play. I'm feeling excited because I'm almost done with this thing. You understand? Have a long week. But we also have an anti-reward brain, which most people don't know. We're wired to feel bad. And this is pretty interesting to me. This is from the scientists of NIAAA and NIDA, the leading research outfits in our country dealing with substance use disorders. A key element of addiction is the development of a negative emotional state during drug abstinence. When people become addicted and they're intervened, and sometimes they come through the legal system, drug courts, sometimes they come through family intervention, sometimes they come through horrible circumstances that they had to lose everything and they come into treatment, why aren't they grateful? Why don't they want to get better? What is it about this individual that says, I don't want any part of this? It's called the anti-reward brain, y'all. See, the new technology and the new science in addiction has to say that once you activate and deplete the reward brain, which is dopamine-based, if it be alcohol or other drugs, you're only left with the anti-reward brain, which is serotonin-based. GABA, glutamate, and all those chemicals that I really won't have time to explain, but the thing about it is, look at this. And so they come in with an overall negative attitude, i.e. early adolescent brain. Because the adolescent brain is the same kind of brain that's developing over time. That's when they get hypercritical about their parents. That's when they realize their world is not right. And all of a sudden their first boyfriend or girlfriend, they lose that first love. And all of a sudden things are bad and they get very depressed and they get very anxious. Y'all understand what I'm saying? So what happens in the world of addiction is you create that same brain again. But once you create it, y'all, it doesn't go back to normal. That's the other piece of this. So the brain has all these things, and y'all can look at it, ideas and good and bad days. How you doing? You're listening and you're reading and you're breathing and you're having exercise. And you see, oh yeah, ice cream and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And this is a neuron, and this is all those things. And some of y'all have had this in biology, so I won't go in through all the different parts, but these are very complicated, and this is millions of these that's in this brain. And this neural communication is pretty interesting. You go from a cell body all the way to the terminal junctions, and you got millions of these, and so the transmission will come into here, it's converted into a chemical, and then it's changed to electrical current, goes here, back into a chemical, and then it goes on. It's pretty interesting how all this works. and then you have the action potential, and then you have a threshold. And all these things take minute amounts of chemicals that are required for appropriate action. And then the thing that's pretty interesting to me is how this neural communication, you have negative and positive, it rotates around, politics, and the direction of the neural impulses. And so we have all of that, synapses. We have the neural communication where we come through here, it's reabsorbed, it's transmitted through the synapse, and then it's retaken and reused and recycled. So this neural communication is pretty complicated. And this is why we have serotonin. That has to do with your depression side of the brain, or the anti-reward brain. And you have dopamine, which has to do with the reward brain. And guess what? Your brain is balancing both of those. And what it's trying to do with both of those is balance it so that most of the time you're just okay. Now, if you're 24, 25, or 26, that's a balancing act. If you're 13 years old, guess what? You're going to be on this side for 10 minutes, and you're going to be on this side for 10 minutes, and you're going to be on this side. So it bounces back and forth. And that's where adolescents do, and that's as they evolve. But we live in a chemical culture, y'all. We live in a chemical culture. I sold 190 tons of opioids in the last 2 years. 190 tons of opioids in the last 2 years. I told them at the university last Tuesday night, very powerful talk was given, but I gave them some background. We only wrote in 2011, y'all want to hear this? We only wrote 250 million scripts for prescription painkillers. And on top of that, we have all the alcohol available to them, and that's what we create these problems. And so what happens in this neurotransmission, you have all these chemical compounds that we won't have time to get into, but we got dopamine here and serotonin, it balancing. You got acetylcholine and norepinephrine and GABA and glutamate, all these wonderful little chemicals that are responsible for all this behavior we've talked about. We've got the nervous system, and the nervous system has two sides to it. And there's the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side. This is what got you up this morning, and this is what calms you down. And so this nervous system here dilates the pupil, that's the stimulation, and then it relaxes your lung tissue, accelerates your heart rate, stimulates the glucose in your liver, relaxes your bladder. And so the thing about it is, when people take stimulants, they stimulate the sympathetic side of the brain. And when they take alcohol and depressants, they stimulate the parasympathetic side of the brain. So guess what happens? Now listen to me when I say this. When you drink alcohol, most people don't know this. The first thing that's impacted according to the brain is your eyesight. And you're driving a car and you have peripheral vision. You have peripheral vision like this. You drink 2 beers within an hour. Guess what, y'all? You reduce your peripheral vision by 50%. You drink 2 more beers, it's another 20, and guess what? You have 4 beers and you're driving like this. What does that mean? You cannot see from the left or the right, so you're always having to rotate your head in order to see the field of vision in order to drive. And y'all know what the windshield is. You know what your mirrors are. You understand? You understand what has to happen in your focus. Not only are you impaired from the standpoint of slowing your reaction down, but you can't see. So you can't see. So 70% of the fatal accidents that occur with adolescents occur from the car being hit from the side, not from the front or the back. You hear what I'm saying? First thing that's impacted y'all is your eyesight. And then the other things that are impacted is your breathing. And so even though you may not have an abuse issue or a dependence issue, you still have an impairment issue because it's severe. It's much more profound than most people thought. Now, this is the other piece about this that most people don't know, is that the neural networks, every part of your nervous system is connected through various other connections. They're all interactive. And so the neurons in the brain connect to one another. So you stimulate one part of the brain, it's kind of like a set of dominoes. You stimulate and it makes it more efficient. So what happens is people start drinking alcohol and they activate these types of receptors, okay, and then they said, well, and this is what we call a thing of cross-dependence, is when you stop drinking and people get, and they say, well, I'm not going to drink anymore, but then they go to marijuana, or they go to opiates, or they go to other drugs. Guess what? They activate this part of the thing even though they haven't drank any alcohol. It stimulates this part of the brain, and guess what? It takes them back to drinking. Pretty powerful. So you got 1 trillion pennies. That's how many neuron connections you have. 1 trillion. That's a bunch of them, ain't it? And then you got 1 quadrillion connections. So you got all these, and this is how the brain starts out. You got all these connections and all these neurons. And by adolescence, the brain has almost reached full size, and conventional wisdom says it should be fully developed. Physically, it's fully developed, but it's not wired. So look at here. At birth, you have this many connections. At 6 years old, you have all these connections. And then as you start into adolescent, guess what? It starts to thin out, y'all. So this 16 million then converts into 4 million, and it makes you more efficient. It makes you more efficient. Alcohol will stop the process. It will call what we call, you ever heard the term scatterbrain? Alcohol creates scatterbrains. They don't fully mature, and they can't focus. Now let me tell you all about the success rate in the world here. You come to the University of Georgia, and congratulations if you can get in, because it takes a lot to get a freshman into the University of Georgia now. If you come to my college, y'all want to hear my college? College of Pharmacy, we will take approximately 1,800 applications. Their PCATs will run anywhere from 93 to 97 percentile. That's the highest scores you can have. Their GPA will be at least a 4.1 or higher. And the thing about it is, we will take, out of that 1,700, we will take 200 applications to interview. And from those interviews, we will accept 140 into the College of Pharmacy. Highly competitive. And it's not just that school, it's everything. If you're going to get that kind of level of education, you're going to need this. You can't have a scatterbrain. Alcohol creates scatterbrains. We laugh, but these are all the things that we see in the anatomy of a teenage brain is embarrassed by the parents section or the parents being around at any time at all. You know, I don't want to, I don't want to be. And then the guy come in, the girls are suddenly fascinating. You know, they've been around the opposite sex for all their life, and all of a sudden they get really, really fascinating. What is all this about? And the ability to listen to extreme loud bass tracks. I mean, it's amazing how the music changes, and all their desires for music. Of course, they got all the technologies now. Cars, and oh yeah, girls. Have no idea. That's pretty good. Ability to remember the lyrics of the offensive hip-hop song. All the things that they do. They have all of these wonderful things they keep up with. But they're not finished. They're not finished. And it's pretty much, Dr. Gill said at the National Institute of Mental Health has revealed, rather than leaving childhood with a brain ready to take on responsibility of young adulthood, teens have to contend with a brain that is destroying old neural connections and building new ones. And y'all need to hear me. Parents, y'all need to understand this. This is a very biologically interesting time, but a very difficult time emotionally for these individuals. So when most parents think, well, my kid's going to get their license and they can, I'm done. That's when you got to get in the middle of it. I can't tell parents that enough. This brain is at a worse transition at 16 than it was at 8. And until people understand that, y'all, we were going to continue to have the multiple problems we got because of that circumstances. We can't build enough prisons, y'all. We can't build enough prisons. Treatment industry is exploding. So what are we going to do? So here's the picture, the evolution of what happens. Here's it, looks good. And so and the more blue you see is the more neural tracts, the reduction. This is how the 16, 18 million, and then as they started to, and the brain actually cools down because all this energy that's being spent, it cools down. So at 20 years old, this is how it looks. And so you've got this very mature, functioning, directed, young adult brain that can make some decisions. Now, I'm going to talk about a word that I really thought about if I was going to include this in our talk, but it's called plasticity. It is in neuroscience the thing that y'all need to know, because some of us are passing, how can I say it, over into older age, and we forget crap. Now, I don't know how many of y'all how many of you forget where your keys are on a regular basis? See, I got a bunch of adolescents. I got See, the adults are lying back there. They're lying. I'm going to tell y'all, they're lying back there. Or you go to the refrigerator, and this is a class one. You go to the refrigerator, and you open it, and you stand and you say, why in the world did I come to the refrigerator? See, it all has to do with plasticity, y'all. It has to do with the brain's ability to physically change its internal structure by making more dendrites when we learn new things and have new experiences. The exciting world of adolescence is that you're going to have all these new experiences, and you're going to learn all these new things. Some of them are going to be great, and some of them are not so great, but you're going to learn how to manage them. You're going to learn how to cope. You're going to learn how to express your feelings. You're going to learn how to help somebody in need. You understand they're very important. Now, as the brain ages, now my older population back here, and of course you see my hair is now turning gray. I'm hoping that it'll be flash white. That's what I want. In fact, I went to the hairdresser the other day and she said, "You want to do some flash white in your hair?" I said, "Well, show me a picture." God, so I may have me a flash white hairdo here not long. But the thing about it is you forget things because the brain after the age of 40 starts to shrink. The adolescent brain is evolving, it's expanding, it's getting rewired, it's getting wired and overwired. The thing about it is, and this is this plasticity, so guess what? You get, look at here, look at this, see this, look at here. See your peaks right here at birth, so just before you're born, the brain, everything comes together and the baby's born, and so it can function in a airborne world. And it kind of goes down, and so we have to, and then it starts walking and talking, and then gets up here, and then it gets here preschool, and then it starts, and then it kind of has a lull. And this is because this brain is resting in order to build these circuits. And then look at here. Here comes adolescent. Here's pre-adolescent, and then here, look at here. Look at it. Look at the peak of it. 15 years old. And then guess what? From 15, you go downhill from there. So by the time you're at some of our ages, guess what? We lucky to I hope that I remember how to tie my shoe. That's why I wear loafers. But at least I can problem solve. You understand? But the thing about it is, during peaks of plasticity, the brain makes key neural connections to wire to make us thoughtful, responsible, intelligent adults. To be successful. During drinking, during peaks of plasticity can seriously damage. So guess what, y'all? If this brain starts drinking during the ages of about 12 to about 18, the plasticity never fully occurs, and it will always be limited. So that even though that the brightest of the bright brains, its ability to learn responsibility through its experiences becomes very limited. So plasticity is why I'm here, is to protect your plasticity, to protect your brain so that it will fully evolve. Without plasticity, you stop growing at 15. And how limited is that brain? I have to deal, I've been in treatment industry over 25 years and have seen over 10,000 patients. Some of them are very bright, very successful athletes. Some have been very successful healthcare practitioners, entertainers, and other things, but none of them are the same once they come in. They're never the same. So why not reach your peak? Why don't you reach your potential? So here's a brain, if you want to see a brain. This is the levels in the brain of a healthy non-drinker. This is what the brain, your brain should be healthy, smooth, looks like this. This is three-dimensional. And this is one of a sober 21-year-old with a 4-year history of heavy alcohol use. This is from Dan Amon's clinics. And you see the wobbles. You see this? See, the brain doesn't forgive the intrusion of psychoactive chemicals into its neurochemistry. It does not forgive that. Regardless of what the level may be, it doesn't forgive it. There's always going to be some sort of damage. There's always some sort of consequence. And so this is what the brain looks like. And guess what, y'all? The brain should look like this. And what happens is when you drink and drug, it starts to shrink the brain. So what happens is you start aging the brain prematurely. So let's say that my brain is reduced by 4% because of my age, 62. but I've had a full brain. I've had a full life. I've had a full career. I've done everything I'm supposed to get done. You understand? Well, let's say that brain has a reduction of 4% at age 15. Where's that brain going to end up? See, that's what I'm trying to tell people is this brain doesn't let people off with even limited amounts of use of alcohol. That is why the laws have been passed that you do not legally drink until the age of 21, because even at 21 they can be damaged, but it's not as significant as the damage I'm just showing you. 40% of those who begin drinking at age 15 will become alcoholics, according to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. Only 7% of those who begin drinking at age 21 will become alcoholics. Look at here, 40 to 7. And the reason for that is, y'all, has to do with that plasticity. Has to do with the developing brain having time to heal and develop fully and somewhat protect itself from that tremendous amount of use. So how does it attack the brain? It assaults the motor coordination and decision making. So not only do you have reaction time in driving and things that happen, but also you make, again, your goal brain is set up to make some poor decisions. Then alcohol knocks out the midbrain. You lose control over the emotions and increase the chances of what we call a blackout. Some individuals, as a result of high amounts of alcohol over short periods of time, will deplete dopaminergic capability in the amygdala, and it will create temporary periods of no memory or blackouts, drug-induced amnesias. Now, I could do that with all of you if I came in here and I got a certain benzodiazepine and I gave you a certain benzodiazepine, you would forget what we did. And some of y'all may be on that drug now and you may not remember anything that we've said so far. And I can tell. I'll do a test at the end of the test, so we'll see. But the thing about it is alcohol does it with high concentrations to any brain. And finally, alcohol batters the brainstem. It affects the heart rate, the temperature, appetite, consciousness. And so what happens is you can create alcohol poisoning. Most people don't know that a majority of young adolescents die not from consequences of alcohol use, but they die from alcohol poisoning. Now, what is alcohol poisoning? If you will look, and people don't do this, there is a poison label on all alcoholic beverages. It has been put there since the early 1900s because ethyl alcohol in certain concentrations will kill you. And part of it has to do with alcohol poison. The good news is, because it's an acidic product, if people was to drink alcohol containing or drinks containing alcohol, it has a high acidic content. Your stomach is acidic, and so guess what happens? People will drink too much, and what they will do is they regurgitate. It will throw it up. That'll be fine. But what happens with a lot of people is they will mix alcohol with another depressant, such as marijuana or a benzodiazepine or some kind of opioid. It stops the gag reflex, and so what happens is all that alcohol sits in the body, it's absorbed into the body in high concentrations, and it will kill a person. So we have that. We've had 2 of those deaths at UGA this past semester. So hippocampus is the learning part of the memory. Age 12 to 25 is a key point for learning, wires for future successful learning. So the hippocampus is a part of that memory system that tells you the good things. That's a great thing. Alcohol will act like a computer virus in a teen brain. It slows and shuts the brain down activity-wise. It damages the neurocircuits. It decreases the ability to learn. It hinders the brain's wiring that brains need to become responsible and thoughtful adults. So that's the things so far that we've learned. Dopamine spells reward. So let's talk about, push it one more level and then I'll be done. What happens to the brain? Why does alcohol work and other drugs work? How does it make you feel good? Well, this is how. We feel good when neurons in the reward pathway release a neurotransmitter called dopamine in the nucleus accumbens and other brain areas, such as here. This is the pleasure center. I feel good. I feel good. I feel real good. All right? It's kind of like, prefrontal cortex. I want a beer. Nucleus accumbens. Why do I want a beer? It makes me feel good. And it goes over here to the area called the ventral tegmentum area, which is the euphoric recall button. And it says, Miller Lite. I want a beer. It makes me feel good. Miller Lite. That's what the normal brain will do. Because Or for some of you, maybe chocolate cake. I don't know. It may be jelly beans of a certain variety. That's what the brain does. And how does that make you feel good? Is because neurons in the reward pathway communicate by sending electrical signals down the axon, like I told you. Electrical signal goes here. The signals pass to the next neuron over this little synapse, little opening between these two neurons, right? Okay? So you feel, oh yeah, baby, we got it. And this is what happened. Dopamine comes across here, little red button, hits the receptor, says, ooh, I feel good, I feel good. And the neuron binds to the receptor, providing a jolt of pleasure. 240-yard drive, T1, out of the dirt, in the middle of the fairway. Then it's just a little 8-iron to the green, Makes me feel great. Excess dopamine is taken up by the signaling, so the brain doesn't want you to feel good for very long. So after I make my shot, then my brain goes back to normal, then I have to make the next shot, and then I duck hook it somewhere, and then I feel bad. But the thing about it is, this excess dopamine is removed because the brain can't produce a lot of it. And on the other side of it, the nerve cells release GABA, an inhibitory neurotransmitter that works to prevent the receptor from being overstimulated. So guess what? Dopamine is the accelerator. GABA is the brake. Accelerator brakes. Accelerator brakes. So I can give y'all, I love y'all's spread there. I love the spread that y'all brought to us. Y'all got some crackers with cheese, right? Y'all like crackers with cheese? Not particularly. Y'all got little bite size, and I love the calorie counts on them because we're very conscious about calories, even though I don't pay a lot of attention and tell y'all exactly how much I eat. And all the fruit. I see all that fruit over there, but I don't see no Frosted Flakes. I don't see any Cocoa Krispies. I don't see any great, this high sugar stuff. And people are more attracted to that kind of food because what does sugar and fat do to the brain? I feel good. See, I'm on a very restricted diet because I'm a fat boy. And I'm trying to become what we call, my golf group calls me a skinny fat boy. Anyway, so I'm driving by, and this is a place right outside of Athens. It has these wonderful, wonderful bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits. Oh, my God. I mean, my grandmama used to, oh, my God. And I'm driving by about 6:30 this morning. I'm going, no, I better not. So I had a banana in the car. So I had me a banana instead of a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit. And that's why I was putting on the brakes. You understand? Accelerator brake. Brain only wants you to feel good naturally a little bit. All right. So then we got the addictive substances, and we come in here, and so people drink alcohol or take amphetamines. And what happens is when people start drinking alcohol, they take it, and they start feeling real good, and it starts doing things to the brain. The other thing that it does, y'all, is it blocks the GABA, very similar to what the opioids do, and so people are left uninhibited. So then people do things under the influence that they probably wouldn't do sober. And adolescent brains, even if they had some cognitive, limited, problem-solving skills and danger awareness, guess what happens? They stop doing it. So, big picture, that's dopamine, that's the receptors. These are the brain reward circuits, prefrontal cortex, nucleus accumbens, VTA, as I told you. These are activated by all these various drugs in various ways. We only have 170 psychoactive chemicals in nature. There's only 170 out of the 13 million compounds available. So even nature knows that we don't want to overstimulate this part of the brain. It knows itself. We don't need to overstimulate it. But anyway. So what's the risk of developing addiction? Due to the brain development, adolescent brain is very susceptible to addiction because of the increased receptor sites. There's a process we call upregulation, which I won't go into, but it's pharmacologically where you have 5 receptors. Let's say we have 5 receptors in the brain in dopamine and you start drinking alcohol, what the brain does as you continue to use on a regular basis, it will increase those receptors to 10 and then to 15 and then to 20. And what that means is that you drink your first beer and you felt real good. Well, you drink on a regular basis for a couple of days, it increases those number of receptors. So when you drink the first beer again, guess what? It doesn't do the same thing. So then guess what most people do? They'll drink the second beer. And we have what we call the increased tolerance because of the increased upregulation of the receptors. And people continue to do that over time, and so they get themselves into trouble. And then they stop drinking, and they want to know, why do I have such a craving? Why do I have such a desire for this particular drug, even though I've stopped using, even in adolescent terms, after 12 months or 18 months? It's because you have all these increased receptor sites screaming for that particular drug. And once that upregulation begins, y'all, I can't stop it. It doesn't reverse because people just stop drinking. It's always there. 50% more receptors for nicotine. Adolescent rats typically are given typical nicotine of daily smokers produce 2 times the number of receptors in the VTA. That's again why nicotine and tobacco combined with alcohol has tremendous cravings. Very rare do you see a social smoker. And it's because it's upregulation. It's because of this rapid increase in the receptors. And it creates this tremendous craving. Decreased dopamine in the reward pathway. I've talked about that. Poor impulse control. That was already a part of the brain. Psychological stress, I've talked about. Y'all are making decisions at this level of education and in your lives that are for first. You're having your first major decision on what am I going to do for what my career may be. What is my first loves. My decision about what am I going to do with manage my parents and my separation from my parents. These things create lots of stress. Low susceptibility of negative side effects, sedation, motor problems, and hangovers. Now this was a percentage of U.S. adults aged 18 and older dependent on alcohol, and this is called the Nisard study. It's a major study that they've done. Look at here, y'all. And this was, I think there was 43,000 people who took this survey, and they separated out the ages. So they said age beginning for the first independence in a lifetime. If I began drinking at age less than 13, 47% developed dependence. If they drank at 14, started drinking at 14, 45%. You see this? 15, 38, 32, 28, 15, 17, 11. Look here. At age 29, 21 or older, 47 at 13, 21, 9. That's why I'm here. I can't stop all of it, but I can stop a majority of it. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm going to spend, instead of being on the golf course and the things I could be doing, I'm going to be with you in order to make sure that we can try to get this number to here. But I got to have your help. You got to get the word out. Because y'all, again, the same thing, alcohol dependence onset. Look here. If you start drinking at 18 to 20s or over 13% of the admissions to this treatment facilities versus if we go down to 24, it's 11%. You go to 35, it's less than 4%. 50s, you understand? The earlier age creates dependence. Less than 2 years is the average time it takes from first drink to first treatment in an adolescent that's under age 15. This is the peak. Again, hazard rates of age onset according to the DSM-4. Look here, here's the peak. And this is where you guys are, right in here. And guess what? That's where it's interesting. I look at this graph and then I look at the plasticity graph and they look almost the same with biological changes in the brain. So here's your risk factors, y'all. In 2005, if you had a family history, you had childhood abuse or trauma, that could be multiple levels. Unwanted sexual involvement before the age of 13, any kind of mental illness, depression, anxiety, personality disorder, teen or other family member, that means it may not be you, it may be other people in your family. Attention deficit disorder, any kind of learning disability or school failure, any kind of parental discord or divorce, parental substance abuse. And then we've added these were in 2005. Then we got, of course, teasing and bullying, which has increased and increased up here because it's now, this area here is now fallen into the trauma issue. Being bullied is a trauma. Severe trauma can create lots of biological components to that. Acne and obesity, this is an image issue. Heterosexual orientation, social rejection, onset of use before 16, the enabling environment. These are the people who are around you that are your peers. Not knowing or ignorance is very low, but that's why we're here today. And energy drinks. Using energy drinks. 5-hour energy, that stuff they advertise like it's no good, increases your risk of dependence by 10%. So don't drink them. Don't use them. So we got all of this goes down to this nice little graph, and you see parental history. As you see this, the increase. If you have a high parental history and used before the age of 13 and 14, your risk factor of developing dependence increased between 40 to 50%. Pretty remarkable stuff. Addiction resilient factors. What's going to stop you from becoming dependent? No history is one. Good mental health, academic confidence, positive relationship with at least one adult. Family eats out together at least 5 days a week. Positive peer group participation in sports, participation in music, drama, and dance, involvement in faith-based activities, taking care of pets. If you had a dog, it helps. You can have a cat too. I'll put that in there. Goat, whatever. Volunteer activities, social acceptance, environmental disapproval of drug use, immediate appropriate scale consequences for alcohol and drug use, and early intervention. All right, that's kind of where we are, and then I'm going to talk about this. So I decided, I didn't have anything else to do, so I decided I want to look at a population that may be high risk of dependence, even though they're super students. They're my students. They're the student pharmacists that are in my college. Some of the best people I know and some of the greatest potential talent in healthcare that I know, because these kids have worked hard to get where they are. So what I did is I took a scale, and I had to have it approved by the University of Georgia because it's human studies, and we had it approved in May, and I gave the questionnaire to my students on April 8th through 13th, and we looked at age of first use, family history, current use, trauma history, impulsivity, negative prescriptions, which means things that might lead you to drink and drug, protective factors that we talked about, and then I used a genetic use patterns survey that was from Marg Creel, who is the mother of the genome study. She's one of the leading geneticists. And so what we did, y'all, is we put that together, and I'll show you this, and I'll come back to this. This is what I found. This is what I found limited. This is the first pass at this. My statistician came to me yesterday screaming because he's never seen such numbers being so closely related to each other, and he wanted to know how in the world did I get this questionnaire. I said I spent 3 years as a clinician. I've spent 25 years as a clinician. Basically what I've done is I've taken a clinical evaluation of substance abuse or dependence and put it into a overall questionnaire, validated questionnaire that students can take who do not have the disease. And this is what we discovered. Proportion of at-risk respondents who transitioned to alcohol dependence. Now, my group didn't use, according to their report, their first age of use was about 17. But by the time they got to us, which is about age 20, we estimated based on the questionnaires that about 1% could meet the criteria for dependence, which is pretty normal, by the way. So that doesn't surprise me, but this is what surprised me. In the years that they were at my school, on the University of Georgia campus, from ages 20 to 21, 22, that went from 1% to almost 6%. I had an increase of over 5% that would meet criteria. I've got, the N in this group is 393. What does that mean? I've got about 20 individuals who are currently dependent to alcohol that's inside of my walls. Now, what am I going to do about that? The data didn't really give us much because a lot of people stop their drinking when the times they graduate because they got to go to work. But the thing that was interesting is that they go back and they get married and they do this and then they increase their drinking again and increase. This is what we call a cumulative probability scale. And so what you will see is it projects out for 10 years. The problem is, y'all, now listen to this. This is CS27. You see this line increasing up? All of my students have to have licenses with the boards of pharmacy in order to be students. I have spent, prior to coming to Georgia, I have made about 500 different board hearings, presentations with pharmacists. You know what the average age of dependents that is being seen before the boards of pharmacy currently are? About the age of 30. I've got it. I've got it. I've got it. So all my clinical years and all my years of looking at it, I think we've got it. And then we're going to add biologicals to it. My next group will do a cheek swab along with the biopsychosocial. And I'll have the risk factors all collected in one place, statistically evaluated. And if I tag these individuals, I can actually separate them out and identify them and tell them you're high risk for dependence, you're moderate risk for dependence, you're low risk for dependence. And I'm taking that to 25 colleges of pharmacy. My N will not be 350 or 390. My N will be 8,000. All right, why am I doing this? Because, y'all, in short, the probability of transitioning from alcohol use to dependence is greatest 3 years after the first use of alcohol. Y'all hear this? It's the greatest 3 years after the first use. So the reason I'm here, I've got a pilot project in South Georgia where they've identified in one of Daugherty County schools, they've identified a high school and they've identified a middle school. And I'm having one of the hospital there, in fact, I've got to find out here, I probably got the message on my phone. The board was meeting and we're going to put a drug abuse curriculum inside of these two pilot schools, and I'm going to test them first. I'm going to test them with something that's modified very similar to this. And I don't know about the biological pieces yet. We still got to work that out. But the thing about it is we're going to do that and we're going to follow them from 6th grade to 12th grade. So what I'm looking for is a system in North Georgia that can be my lab, that can be my place that we can do some things. And then as we go through this process, we look at the various interventions and processes and curriculums and see if there's by chance any better outcome. So, because teens average 2 drinks for 2 years, weekends, or binging, they have smaller hippocampuses, 10% less recall, and more likely will not be very successful students. So then the burden falls on me, a taxpayer, to support them throughout this process and to support whatever else they do. And it also falls onto you, and right now we don't have any money. So guess what? The budgets are strapped, and so they're shutting down. So what happens is these people then wind out without homes, out here on the streets, other places. And there's really no sense in that. At least lower grades. Adult rats are 2 times as much beer as an adolescent rat equivalent amount. So what happens is the damage occurs here, creates an increased tolerance. Here's marijuana. There's the normal brain. And this is 2 years of use. Just to let you know, marijuana is very, very destructive to the brain. That's 3 years. This is the changes in alcoholism. This is what it should look like. That's what it looks like after they develop. This is eating disorder. This is an obese person. This is cocaine. You see this? All these brains change. And there's memory changes. There's virtual novelty changes. They don't care about things or lose interest in things with alcohol and other drugs. So the thing about it is, there's also with marijuana, as well as with alcohol, the increase of testicular cancer and other cancers with alcohol are still a part of this. And so this is pretty interesting. This is serotonin levels with ecstasy. I'll just show you this. This is what the brain looked like first time they did it. And then they scanned the brain 2 weeks later, and this is what, after using the dosages they gave with the monkey, they almost cleaned the brain, was wiped clean from the damage of ecstasy. That's why methamphetamine is so destructive. And even though they looked at the brain 7 years later, it did regenerate, but it's nothing like it did before. There's no repairing of that brain. And so we have loss of memory and recovery. For smoking, depression, panic, anxiety levels are the two things that have come out of the recent studies. And so, with that, y'all have been very patient. Any questions?